The simplest thing you could do is relax the body and allow the mind to calm down. And as the mind calms down and there's less thinking going on, less mental activity going on, that frees your attention up to see. It frees your attention up to see things as they are instead of the interpretation the mind's making of what's going on all the time. We have a relationship with the mental activity that we depend on, unfortunately. We have a relationship with the mental activity that we have been conditioned to depend on, and it's constantly interpreting what's happening. Its interpretation is different from what's happening. That's an important thing to know, that we see things that are happening, and we use the thinking activity as a reference point to tell us what that is that's happening. And that's not a good idea, because the reference point that we're depending on, our conditioning, is a very limited database of information. If your conditioning is a database of information that thinking is using to think, if your conditioning is a database of information that's being used to interpret reality, right? Obviously, it's a very small database compared to the information that is available from reality. That's one of the reasons why, what I think is happening and what you think is happening and what somebody else thinks, everybody in this room has got a different thought pattern about what's happening, right? That in and of itself is dangerous. That's why the world is the way it is right now, right? Because people believe that their thoughts are the truth. This is very, very important to understand. Before I came to these teachings and practices, I was just like you. We were all the same. We thought our thoughts were the truth, didn't we? We thought our thoughts were a reflection of reality, right? It's not. My thought is not an interpretation of reality. It is reality. What I think is true. What I think is real. This is how people operate, and they don't know they're doing it. They don't know they're doing it. Even though the evidence is pretty obvious that if we're both experiencing the same thing, if we're both in the same situation, right, and my interpretation of it is different from your interpretation of it, doesn't that mean that maybe neither one of us are seeing it the way it is? And if that's the case, that's problematic. It really is worth the trouble to train yourself to pay attention to what's happening and notice the difference between what's happening and what your mind says is happening. It's very important. It's not that your mind is always wrong, just most of the time. That's bad enough, right? Well, first of all, it doesn't have its own separate existence. It doesn't have an independent existence. Your personality doesn't exist as a separate reality from your awareness. It is awareness in a very limited form called conditioning, right? But it's a survival operation. That's why it does that, right? Because the way it's designed, if you don't listen to it, you'll die according to the way it's designed, right? Therefore, it will use everything that it can in terms of your emotions, your logical thoughts, whatever it can, whatever material it can, right, to have you stay believing that it's what you are. It will do that. I mean, any of you who are really serious students of this will experience this. When you get into conflict with somebody that you're close to, right, the teachings go out the window. They go out the window, and it's like these thoughts are true, goddammit. You are like that, You're really an asshole, It's not just me, right? Isn't that the way the mind works? It's insistent. And then it brings up strong emotions, right, to energize the thoughts, right? So the only way you can do these practices is to understand that you have to learn to lose. You have to learn to fail. You will fail. It's naive to think that you could take these practices on, right? And because I know the truth and I'm practicing the truth, everything's smooth sailing. No. Not only is everything not smooth sailing, but it can be worse than it ever was in the beginning. Because now you think, oh, I know, I hear these practices, I hear these teachings, I have these practices to practice, I understand how it works, the truth shall set me free, I can get out of these situations that I find myself in that are so stressful and disturbing and unworkable, right? But then that doesn't happen, and you find yourself caught up in emotions and thoughts and fighting with somebody and arguing with somebody. And then after that happens, you make yourself wrong, right? So, but that's what you have to go through if you're going to do this work. It's not going to happen all at once. It's a very gradual. There are only two ways this happens, right? And if you look at the material, if you look at the internet and you listen to people talk about these things, there are only two ways that these things happen. The way it happened to Eckhart Tolle, right? He wasn't even searching for anything, right? He was about to kill himself, right? Sometimes this happens spontaneously without any preparation, right? But that's very seldom the case. For most of us, this is going to be a gradual process where you learn, you keep learning about it, you keep coming up, you keep getting confused about it, you keep practicing, the practicing gets harder, it gets easier, but you persist. You have to stay the course and persist. That's the key to success here, is to persist. And you have to accept that you're going to lose it and go crazy sometimes. That's the way it works, right? You'll know that you're on the path when you get to the point where you lose it and go crazy, but you don't try and justify yourself, and you're willing to take responsibility for having lost it and been crazy. If you can be that way, you're on the path, right? Before you're on the path, you'll go crazy, and then you'll justify it, and you'll insist that it's true, and you won't let it go. The mind and the personality are complicated. You know, that's why in psychology, I mean, most people don't understand this. When most people go to see a psychotherapist, I've been a psychotherapist for 50 years. I've never had anybody come to me for psychotherapy and ask me, what theoretical model are you practicing? Never had it. And there's 30-something theories of personality. And they're all very different in terms of explaining what you are as a personality, right? So it's very important to understand what theoretical model is being used if you go to psychotherapy, because they're very different, and the practice of the psychotherapy is going to be very different. Right? But nobody does that. They go to psychotherapy and they think, oh, it's psychotherapist, so I'm at psychotherapy. The worst part of it all is that all the theoretical models don't work. Because they're all based on the same conclusion that people are personalities, and they're not. They're just not. All human beings live in a prison to the extent that they take themselves to be something that they're not. That's a prison. That's a prison, right? So if you realize that you're not who you took yourself for, that's not enough. You can't just realize that you're not what you took yourself for. That won't change anything. You'll just be more frustrated having found that out. You have to practice it consistently to undo what got done to you, to undo the conditioning that got done, you know, that had you believe that you're a physical body and a personality. Just think about it. I mean, you know, we live in a world where 99% of humanity takes themselves to be something that they're not, a physical body and a personality. That's why the world is in the toilet. But you don't have to fly with those birds. You know, you don't have to go off a cliff with this herd that's running off a cliff. And they are running off a cliff, right? You can break away from the herd, right? And start to experience yourself as what you really are. And when you experience yourself as what you really are, in the beginning, it may only give you glimpses of the experience of well-being. If you continue to practice meditation and you stay connected with the truth, right? And you do have to stay connected with the truth. Because when you leave this room and you go back out there, you're back in the world of the lie. You know, you're back in the world, and you have to play the lie game to function. You have to pretend you're something that you're not to get along, don't you? Yeah, you have to do that, right? So in order to maintain the truth, you have to have a consistent, you have to keep feeding the reality of the truth consistently every single day. In Buddhism, they call it, you know, the Buddha, the Sangha, and the teaching are a place that you can go to escape the craziness, right? Yeah. So every day you should spend time not only meditating, but either reading something or watching something that will connect you to the truth. Because when you're not connected to that and when you're not practicing, you've got to be back in the world of the way things are for most other people, which is that they're taking themselves to be a personality in a physical body, which makes it more difficult, more challenging. I'm not saying this is easy. I'm not saying this is easy. I'm saying this is the most difficult thing you will ever do, right? To stop being who you have taken yourself to be for years. Right? Because your brain is hypnotized to be that, right? So this is the most difficult thing you could possibly do in your life, and at the same time, it's the most important thing you could possibly do in your life. And if you do it the way it's meant to be done, if you do the practices the way they're meant to be done, and if you stay connected to the teaching, you'll start to see the light. You'll start to see what life is like when you're not living in a mental state. Alan Watts used to tell a story about the washing dishes. It was one of his favorite stories, you know. And the story goes that there was a woman who was standing in the kitchen washing dishes, and as she was standing there washing dishes, she was thinking about all the dishes. She visualized in her mind all the dishes she's ever washed in her life, and she imagined piles of dishes there. And then she imagined all the dishes she's going to wash in the future, and she imagined piles of dishes there. And then she paid attention to the dish in her hands, and she realized she only ever has to wash one dish. That's called mindfulness, you know. If you're paying attention to the present reality and you're not in your head, right, that's all there is to deal with. That's what that is. That's all there is to deal with. What's real is what's happening now. That's the only thing that's real. Right? How much of our time do we spend with that? When you're experiencing your true nature, there is no past. This is the cure for post-traumatic stress. The cure for post-traumatic stress is simply to practice being in the present and practice being what you are. There is no past when you're being what you are. And when you're practicing that, even though there may be traumatic material in your brain, right? Because you're not interacting with it, it will relax just like everything else in your mind over time, out of disuse. See, out of disuse. If you don't use thinking to suffer, if you don't use thinking to keep remembering the past, and if you don't use thinking to keep imagining the future, out of disuse, it will get quiet. But this is an addiction. This is a habitual way of living life, isn't it? You know, I mean, we're taught as kids to think, aren't we? And we're told thinking is important. Be good at it. Do a lot of it. Figure shit out, right? So we're being taught to do the very thing that's going to cause our suffering. If you want to do anything good, your personality cannot be part of the process. If your personality is part of the process, you can't do it very good. I mean, I found that out with psychotherapy, you know. If you're working with people in psychotherapy and your personality gets involved, it's going to bring your effectiveness as a therapist down. Because you're going to be reacting to what's happening all the time. You know, am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? Am I succeeding? Am I failing? All that jazz, right? That's what goes on when you're in the personal mindset, right? You're always thinking about yourself in relationship to what's going on. And that distorts your perception of what's going on, right? And it dilutes your perception of what's going on. A mantra is just another way of paying attention to something to move your attention out of the mind. That's all. In the Zen approach, we use the breath. In TM, they use a mantra, but it's basically the same thing. You're paying attention to the mantra instead of your mind. That's all. It's a little different in the sense you're giving the mind something to do. It's called cookies for the mind, to keep it busy. That's what mantra does. It keeps the mind busy. In this practice, we're not keeping the mind busy. We're just moving attention away from the mind and focusing it on the body breathing.
And what are the trainings of the mind? What are the eight?
The 8 verses for training the mind is 8 verses, obviously. And basically what the 8 verses say is, in your dealings with other people, no matter who they are, no matter how close to them you are, no matter how many things you've done for them, if you get into conflict with them, right, you give them the victory. You always give the victory away. You never allow yourself to win.
That'll make my husband happy.
It does make. But you see, and if you just read the 8 verses of training the mind, right, you'll see your mind reacting to it just reading it. The first time I read that, the voice in my head was saying, no way, no way. I'm not going to let. When I'm right, I'm really right. I'm not going to be wrong, right? That's the way it is. But who is it that's right? It's you, the personality, that's right. So by practicing giving away, every time you're in that position to give it away, you're giving away your identification with the personality. That's all you're doing. When you're experiencing your true nature, you have nothing to defend, you have nothing to protect. So whenever you're in conflict, you let the other person win. What the hell's the difference? It takes what? It takes what? Practice. Start with the little shit. Start with the traffic, when you want to give the finger,
Yeah,
Road rage.
I've been able to do that.
Yeah. Start with the little stuff and then go from there up to the bigger stuff. You go for that, and then the next thing you can go to is when you're on the phone with Xfinity, or you're on the phone, whoever you get on the phone with to correct things, right? And you start getting frustrated, right? And the person on the phone doesn't sound like they give a shit about it, right? That would be a little higher level practice, right? And then the higher level practice is with your wife or your kids or your parents. They're the ones that, see, in public, we behave ourselves because we know people in public aren't going to take our shit. But then we go home with the people that we love, that we're closest to, they'll take our shit. So we'll abuse them. That's what we do. We abuse them. But that's the place to practice. That's going to be the hardest practice, is when there are people that you love and there are people that love you, and you come into conflict. You come into banging heads. And I know it works, just like David said on Sunday. He said, my relationship with my wife is perfect. It works all the time. We never have any conflict. She's always right. That's his practice. His practice is she's always right. It's never a problem. Just don't pay, it's like I said, what I said earlier. If you don't think about it, is there anything wrong?
Yeah.
So don't think about it. Then there won't be anything wrong. That works all the time, by the way. That works all the time. If you don't think about it, how can there be anything wrong? Yeah? Because it's the thought process that's generating the conflict all the time. The mind is saying, oh no, that's right, this should be different. Based on what? My conditioning. Well, your conditioning doesn't mean much. If you let life be the way life is, life will let you be the way you are.
That's it.
Simple as that.